All right, have a seat. We're going to be here a while. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I called Harry before my visit to just check in and get some advice and counsel. You have been a trailblazer in your career, and I cannot thank you enough for your role of leadership and for introducing me this afternoon, so thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so very much for being here. It's a holiday, it is snowing outside, and there are many things you could be doing with your time, but that you've chosen to spend it, and I know there was a line and folks had to wait, that you've chosen to spend it being here means the world to me, and obviously is a reflection of the leaders who are in this room and how much we all care about our country. So I thank you. I thank you. Thank you. So I just arrived this morning, and the press, I did a couple, like they call it a gaggle, a couple of press interviews. And one of the first questions, so I just want to get this out of the way. The elephant in the room. Well, no, we're not going to have any elephants in the room. Let me just be clear. Get the elephants out of the room. I intend to compete in New Hampshire. I intend to spend time here. I intend to shake every hand that I possibly can. I want to talk with you. I want to listen to you. I want to be challenged by you. I want to ensure that at the end of this process, we are relevant, and the only way that will be achieved is by spending time with leaders such as those in this church and having the opportunity to have many conversations and have conversations in depth. So I'm here to tell you, I plan on spending time in New Hampshire. I plan on competing in New Hampshire. I plan on doing very well in New Hampshire. So that is my intention, and I'm going to work toward it. So I am here to listen, as much, if not even more than I intend to talk, but I'm going to share with you a few thoughts that I have, and then we're going to open it up for a conversation and take questions. We announced this campaign just a little over 3 weeks ago in my hometown of Oakland, California, and I got some home people in here. And, people have been asking me, why are you running? So I'll tell you, there are a number of reasons. One, I love our country. I love our country. And I know what we are capable of. I know who we are, what we believe in, the values, the principles upon which we were founded. And I'm prepared to fight for those. I also believe that we are looking at an America today where American values and the American dream are under attack, and we have got to stand to defend those dreams and ideals and values. I also believe that it is time to restore opportunity for all Americans in this country. Not just a few, not just the top 1%, not just big corporations, but everyone. And right now in our country, we are looking at extreme inequities, and we have to correct course. And I guess the final point is this. My sister and I, she's here, Maya, we were raised by a mother who, when we'd come home and talk about, oh, this happened or this problem and, complaining about something, the first thing she'd say is, well, what are you going to do about it? So I decided to run for president of the United States. So there you go. So it is a time to restore truth and justice in our country. Many of you know my background includes, and the speaker, Terry, told you, part of my background is I was a prosecutor for many years. I've prosecuted everything, including homicides. I believe this is a moment in a time to restore truth and justice. And so let's take a look at where we are. It's an inflection point. We're at an inflection point in the history of our country, and actually in the world. This is a moment in time that is requiring each of us, and collectively, to look in a mirror and ask this question, who are we? And I believe part of the answer to that question is, We are better than this. We are better than this. And so this is a moment that is requiring us to fight for the best of who we are and fight for those principles behind that word justice. So let's take a look in the mirror and see where we have been. It is not justice to have a system where you give a $1 trillion tax credit to the top 1% and the big corporations of America. That is not justice. It is not justice when we separate babies from their mothers and fathers at the border and claim that that's about border security, when in fact what it is a human rights abuse. It is not justice in a country that values civil society that we do not pass gun safety laws because of fear of lobbyists instead of understanding that our values should be about protecting our babies when they go to school, protecting people where they worship, and understanding that we should never bow down to those who have a lot of money because we are afraid that we may not win re-election when people are dying in our streets. So we've got to fight for truth and justice. Truths. Let's speak some truths. You know, I think we all know right now there are a lot of folks who rightly are feeling quite distrustful of their government and its institutions and leaders. And the thing about a relationship of trust is this. The very nature of a relationship of trust is such that it is a reciprocal relationship. You give and you receive trust. And one of the most important ingredients in trust is truth. But there's a funny thing about truth. Speaking truth often makes people quite uncomfortable. And for those of us who have these microphones and stand behind podiums, there is an incentive that when we speak, everyone will feel lovely and they will applaud and we'll sprinkle lovely dust all over the room and everyone will have had a good day and job will have been done. Well, speaking truth doesn't always accomplish that goal, does it? But here's the other thing about speaking truth, which we all know. Yes, people may walk away from that conversation thinking, you know, I didn't particularly like what I had to hear. But they will also walk away from that conversation knowing it was an honest conversation. So let's speak some truth as we attempt to restore trust. So you're looking at me, okay, Kamala, what do you have in mind? Okay, let's speak truth. Let's speak truth that America right now is not working for working people. And I'll tell you how I know that. When we know that almost half of families in America cannot afford a $400 unexpected emergency, that it will pull them in a spiral, we know we must speak truth that America right now is not working for working people. When we know that in our country today, in 99% of the counties in the United States, if you are a minimum wage worker working full-time, you cannot afford market rate for a one-bedroom apartment. We know America's not working for working people, which in fact is why I propose that we change the tax code to reflect the needs of working people, and in particular, as it relates to working families that are making less than $100,000 a year, I propose that they get a tax credit such that they get to collect $500 a month to be able to meet the cost of living, because we have to recognize some people want to walk around touting, oh, the economy is great, the economy is great. Well, let me tell you, Terry, and you know what I'm talking about. I've been traveling this country talking to folks. I'm meeting folks who they say, yeah, you know, you can talk about the unemployment numbers. I'm working 2 and 3 jobs. People will talk about, yeah, I'm working, but my wages aren't meeting the cost of living, of gas, of rent, of utilities. We've got to speak these truths. Let's speak the truth. Let's speak the truth about education. You know, we're a society that pretends to care about education, not so much the education of other people's children. Let's speak that truth. Let's speak that truth. Let's agree that we have failed to put the resources into our public education system, and instead we are putting tons of money into a system of mass incarceration because we are not being smart about investing in the future of our country. Let's speak these truths. And meanwhile, we have an administration that puts in place a head of the Department of Education that talks more about grizzly bears than she does children who need resources. And is trying to privatize the public education system of this country. Let's speak these truths. Let's speak the truth that in this country today, many, if not most, American families are just short of bankruptcy because of an inability to pay a hospital bill. Let's speak that truth. And that the truth also is that health care and access to health care should not be a privilege, it should be a right. Which is why I support Medicare for all. Let's speak truth. If Charlottesville did not make it clear, if the Tree of Life Synagogue did not make it clear, racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia are real in this country. Let's speak these truths so we can deal with them. Let's speak one of the most important truths that at this particular time must be spoken when we have such powerful forces that are trying to sow hate and division among us. The most important truth that I believe we must know in our heads and in our hearts is the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. Let's speak that truth. And I know that to be true. I know that to be true. Listen, we are a beautifully diverse country, right? I mean, just look at the weather right outside that window and imagine what it's like in Hawaii right now. We have all kinds of diversity of religion and race and ethnicity and topography and industry, and we could go on and on. We are a beautifully diverse country. And some would suggest that within diversity, it is not possible to achieve unity. Oh, there's so many differences. How can we achieve unity? Well, I'll tell you this. The way we achieve unity is by understanding that, yes, we are diverse, and we have so much more in common than what separates us. And here's how I think about it. I think about it in the context of what some of us call the middle of the night thought. Others refer to it as the 3 in the morning thought. Others refer to that time as the witching hour. You know what I'm talking about, right? In the middle of the night, when you wake up with that thing that's been weighing on you, sometimes in a cold sweat. For the vast majority of us, when we wake up at that moment thinking that thought that's been weighing on us, it is never through the lens of the party with which we're registered to vote. It is never through the lens of some demographic a pollster put us in. And for the vast majority of us, when we wake up thinking that thought, it has to do with one of just a very few things. Our personal health, the health of our children, our parents. For so many Americans, can I get a job, keep a job, pay the bills by the end of the month, retire with dignity? For so many of our parents, can I get my child access to treatment for their opioid addiction? For so many of our students, can I pay off those student loans? The vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And as we go forward then and fight this good fight, let's hold on to that. Let's not let anyone take that away from us. And let's remember our strength as a nation. You know, in these last 2 years, there's been a lot that has happened that has caused us to, shout at the TV, throw things, individual group therapy. But let's hold on to some things. Let's hold on to an image I'll share with you that I have witnessed. I've been in the Senate now 2 years. My office is in the Hart Building, Senate Hart Building on the first floor. Let me tell you what I've seen in our nation's capital. I have seen thousands of dreamers descend on our nation's capital, traveling by bus, train, car, sleeping, I'm sure, 10 deep on someone's living room floor, marching the halls of Congress, believing that if they are seen and their stories are heard, it will matter. I've seen the same thing with these incredible teenagers from Parkland and their parents, traveling, marching, requiring people to see them and hear them. I saw it with parents who brought their children during our fight to keep the Affordable Care Act, who came and brought their children at various levels of disability, families for whom it's a huge effort to move the child from one room of the house to another, traveled across the country, walking those halls, believing if they were seen and their stories were heard, it would matter. I saw it with survivors around the Kavanaugh hearing, who by the hundreds, most of whom had never told their story to anyone, and had the courage and the conviction to travel to our nation's capital, believing that if they were heard, it would matter. There is an incredible amount of power in the people of our country, and conviction, and hopefulness. And we cannot lose that. We must hold on to that as we go forward to 2020. We must remember, part of our strength is those principles and ideals upon which we were founded. Those ideals that were present in the writing of the Constitution of the United States and all its amendments, in the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. The ideals behind those words we spoke in 1776. That we are all and should be treated as equals. Part of the strength of our nation is we were founded on noble ideals and we made a commitment to fight to achieve those ideals. We are an aspirational nation. Now, but let's also be clear-eyed. We've not quite met those ideals. We know that. But our nature is to fight to achieve them. And we cannot lose that aspirational nature of who we are, because that is part of our strength. So when I think about this inflection moment, that's how I think about where we are and who we are. And I guess my final point is this, and then we should open it up for questions and comments and whatever any would like to say. Final point. Years from now, our children, our grandchildren, others, they will look in each of our eyes. You may look in somebody's eyes, but you're going to look in their eyes too. And they're going to look in our eyes, and they're going to ask us, where were you at that inflection moment? And what we're going to be able to say is, we were all hanging out in this church together, and our answer to that question is going to be so much more than just how we felt at this moment. Our answer is going to be what we did, what action we took, that we stood up, we stood out, we stood up, we marched, we shouted, we did everything we can to fight for the best of who we are. That's what we will tell them. That's what we will tell them. That's what we will tell them. Okay. How you doing? Okay. We'll take questions. Okay. That water's for me.
They gave me a new mic that doesn't work either, so okay. They told me I get to ask the first question. So I hear a lot every day about how the Democratic Party has become a party of the coasts. And I also hear at the same time people telling me that they're more concerned than ever about a candidate coming out of the Democratic primary that can actually win in the general election. So my question is, what will your campaign look like, and how will you reach your message to the heartland of our country?
Great. That's a great question. Thank you. Well, for starters, I plan on prosecuting the case against people who do not tell the truth and who are purveyors of injustice in this country. And that case will be successfully prosecuted, because there's a lot of evidence of injustice and a lack of truth and a lack of commitment to working people. It is also going to be a matter of understanding that, back to the commonalities. You know, I reject the notion that depending on where you were born, you don't identify with or care or connect with someone else. I believe that ultimately this election is going to come down to who the American public believes will be a leader. And a leader in a way that also understands that power is about understanding and caring and having an interest in the lives of people other than oneself. And then acting on their needs as opposed to self-interest. And ultimately, my experience having run an office of over almost 5,000 people as Attorney General, the work I've done in the United States Senate, and the work that I know needs to happen around really restoring America's role and standing on the globe is going to be critically important, and I'm prepared to do it.
We're going to start right here. There's a mic coming around to you.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for taking my question, and thank you for talking about the truth. That's refreshing, and I was especially happy to hear you talking about Medicare for all. I want to tell you, I have a 14-year-old son who has a life-threatening disability, and he requires medication that he carries with him everywhere he goes all the time, and has since he was 2 and will for the rest of his life. And we've had the experience of drug companies raising the prices on that medication to the point where families who need it for their child's survival can't afford it. And so I am wondering if you would consider co-sponsoring Senate Bill 102 the drug company pricing bill that will protect consumers from drug companies doing exactly this and abusing their monopolies by taking patents away from drug companies when they exploit their consumers in this way, and particularly when they charge Americans 10 times more than they're charging people in other countries for the exact same medication, because it would make me feel safer for my son in this country.
Thank you. I think I'm on that legislation. I know I've been supportive of that effort in the past, so I can check specifically on that piece of legislation. But first of all, I thank you for having the courage to tell your story. I think more people need to understand and see you and parents like you and individuals like you and understand what it really means to go through the healthcare system in this country. Because far too many people, I think, are playing political games with it and really don't understand what it is like to be an individual who needs healthcare or be the family member and loving of someone who needs to go through the system. And I'll just share with you my personal experience. My mother, who raised us, passed away a few years ago after having cancer. And my mother was a ferocious woman who after you met her, you would have thought she was 7 feet tall, but actually she was 5 feet. And she was actually a breast cancer researcher and had two goals in her life: to raise her two daughters and breast cancer. And she ended up having cancer. And going through that system with her, you know, I'll never forget meeting a nurse who said, "Has anyone talked to you about anticipatory grief?" And I had never heard the term, but it explained everything. When you're going through the healthcare system, when someone who's facing an acute illness and you're already grieving their departure, you don't realize it, you're going through a process of hoping that your son is not in pain, of monitoring the reaction that someone has to the medication they're being given, to making sure that the medical health professionals who are treating them are on top of their needs and are responding to the feedback they're giving, making sure and trying to figure out how you can be creative in giving them something that they might actually be able to eat or want to eat because they don't have an appetite. Worrying about just physically where they will be when they're out of the hospital, when they're in the hospital. And for people to have to go through that is an incredible emotional, physical, I don't want to say burden, it's what you do, but it's very difficult. And then on top of that, to require people to have to worry about how they're going to pay that bill, that is not the sign of a civil society. We didn't have, my mother had Medicare, so that was not our concern, but it is the concern of so many people in this system. And a contributor to that is the pharmaceutical companies, who are, listen, I mean, let's talk about the opioid crisis in America today. These pharmaceutical companies were pushing this drug, knowing of its side effects and not appropriately informing the public. Let's talk about how they've been gouged, the public has been gouged in terms of any drugs that can actually help people through recovery. The system is immoral, because the way that it is working right now and the way pharmaceutical companies are working right now, for the most part, it is clear their motivation is profit, not public health. And it's immoral. It's immoral when you're talking about health. When you're talking about health. And so Medicare for All, one of the reasons I support it is because when it would be achieved, we would be able to negotiate on behalf of all of us against the pharmaceutical companies, which means that we would be able to bring down prices and have more influence around, to your point, what we also need, which is to have greater access to generics. and not have pharmaceutical companies shut down competition because they're afraid that competition obviously means that the prices would go down and the quality might go up. So I'm all on board with that, and I just want to thank you for telling your story. I know it's not easy.
Okay, how about right here? Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. I'm part of a grassroots, Indivisible New Hampshire, a group that has been working in New Hampshire to oppose voter suppression. And you may remember that New Hampshire was ground zero for voter suppression in 2016 when Trump declared busloads of illegal voters were the reason he lost the state to Hillary Clinton. Then our Secretary of State joined the discredited Kobach Commission, and a couple of voter suppression laws were passed here in New Hampshire. Voting rights is a core issue for me and many of the Indivisible New Hampshire members. And I am an ACLU voter, and I care about civil rights and civil liberties. My question is, would you commit to passing a modern Voting Rights Act that would incentivize states to adopt same-day and automatic voter registration and expand early and mail-in voting opportunities and make Election Day a national holiday?
Absolutely. 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 Yeah. Absolutely. No question. But, and if I may, I just want to contribute to your point. In the 2018 election cycle, we saw massive voter suppression taking place. Remember, so 2013, the United States Supreme Court in Shelby v. Holder gutted the Voting Rights Act. It had only been around like 50 years. And remember that part of what it gutted was that provision that recognized certain states had a history of voter suppression and therefore should be monitored. And it removed the requirement, basically, of monitoring those states. And guess what happened almost immediately after that case came down? Something like 20-something states, their legislatures, put in place voter restrictions. To the point that there was a case out of North Carolina, was challenged because it was so obviously restrictive. The Court of Appeals said, and I'm going to quote these words, the Court of Appeals said that the law that they put in place was so outrageous that it, and then here's the quote, with surgical precision attempted to dissuade black voters from voting. We saw it in 2018 around Native American voters. We saw it in 2018 around students. It is voter suppression happening across and intimidation happening across our nation. So I absolutely support it, but I would also say this to all of the leaders here. 2020, we're not only going to see these attempts happen again, and so let's be prepared for it, right? Because we'll litigate. The ACLU does an extraordinary job, so does the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, so many great organizations, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. We'll litigate it, but it'll pretty much, unless we get injunctions, it'll be after the fact. What we also have to do as organizers is think about how we will, and start doing it now, how we're going to try and make it as easy as possible for our neighbors around the country to vote, because we can guarantee there will be suppression. And then the second point I want to make is this, to your point about 2016. The other voter manipulation is Russia. Let's get ready. Let's get ready for that. Because we have the tools, sadly, because we've been used to voter suppression in the, pardon the word, but the classic way. This is a whole other thing. In fact, I have a bill, it's a bipartisan bill with a Republican from Oklahoma. His name is James Lankford. He and I both are the only two members of the United States Senate to have served on Homeland Security and Senate Intelligence at the same time. And we have a bill that basically would require states to upgrade their elections infrastructure, because guess what? Going like back to the future, best and smartest way to conduct voting, paper ballots. Paper ballots. I joke and I say paper ballots because Russia can't hack a piece of paper. But we also have to pay attention to that contemporary, the latest version of what's going to happen around attempting to manipulate the American public as we vote. But absolutely, count me in.
Let's head over here. I saw a hand over here.
Hi, my name is Paul O'Connor. I'm a union man. And up until 3 years ago, a federal employee at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, 40 years at the shipyard. I'm sure there are feds in this room, union brothers and sisters in this room, and shipyarders in this room. And personally, I am tired of the way labor unions and federal employees are being treated, vilified, being subjected to terrible legislation that is not exclusive to the Republican Party. I want to know, Senator, what you are doing now as a senator and what you will do as president to level the playing field for unions and to help restore the reality of the dignity of federal employees.
Right, thank you. Thank you for that. I agree with you. I mean, let me just start from the beginning. I have long supported organized labor. Organized labor has long supported me. I've walked picket lines. I am with you. There has been an erosion of labor and organized labor. We've seen it in states like Wisconsin and others, because there are powerful interests that know that when working people unite, especially around collective bargaining, that working people win. And there are some who unfortunately have decided that it's a zero-sum game, not understanding that when working people win, America wins. That when working people have the wages and benefits commensurate with the value they perform, that it uplifts families and communities and all of society. And we have challenges, you're right, because there has been a wholesale attack on organized labor. And we've seen it in particular out of this administration. I will always stand with labor. Listen, organized labor brought us the 5-day work week. Today's holiday we have, right? Sick leave. We don't yet have family paid leave like we should, but we're working on that. But we all, any working person, owes a debt of gratitude to organized labor in this country. So.
How about, let's go over here. There's a mic ready for you.
Thank you. There are a lot of challenges facing us right now, but to me, the one that is most important is climate change. What can you do specifically?
So I was trying not to go too long with all my truths, but let's speak a truth that is one of the most fundamental truths. Climate change is real. And it poses an existential threat to us as human beings. And it is within our power to do something about it. Because, I mean, let's all be clear, we're not talking about a meteor that might hit the planet. We're talking about human behaviors that are contributing directly to greenhouse gas emissions. We are talking about human behaviors that are resulting, you know it here in this region, to what we need around clean drinking water, what we need in terms of our need as human beings to breathe clean air. And we are at a moment where we are about to throw away the future of our planet for our children and grandchildren. It is an immediate threat, and we have to understand this with a great sense of urgency. And I will tell you, I find it absolutely outrageous and on the just absolute malpractice that this administration would have you buying science fiction instead of science fact. That they're in the hands and trying to feed big coal and big oil instead of understanding what is in the best interest of the people on this planet and our role of leadership. And we have, by the way, not even begun this evening to talk about how we are ceding our position among our neighbors around the globe on so many issues, including this. It's outrageous. I am supporting the Green New Deal. We have to have goals, and we have to, it's a resolution that requires us to have goals and think about what we can achieve and put metrics on it. Some of them we'll achieve, some of them we won't. But if we don't aspire, this is gonna be a bad ending. And I hate to sound this way. I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but it is very real, and it is within our power. And, you know, in California and in so many states, we've seen at a state level, it makes a difference. But this is a challenge of whether or not they're going to be leaders. And clearly, we don't have a leader in the White House on this.
How about right back here? Yep, if you stand up, the microphone will come over to you.
Thank you for taking my question. So in the last 15 or 20 years, suicide rates have steadily been on the rise in this country, more so than homicide rates, and I myself have seen the shortcomings that the mental health care system can sometimes offer its patients. Yeah. I was just wondering if you were elected president, what your administration would do to alleviate this.
Yes, definitely. That's a great question. And thank you for sharing that. First of all, I believe very strongly that we should have a national policy around mental health care and substance abuse treatment on demand. And that is what I'm proposing. That just like you can go into an emergency room anywhere and get care, you should be able to walk into a treatment facility and receive care. And what we know is that when we're looking at everything from suicide rates to what we're looking at in terms of drug addiction, there is a direct connection between either the presence and resources into those areas of treatment or not, and what those other outcomes can be that are lethal and fatal. And when I think about it, I also understand that part of the challenge that we have as a country is that we have not done enough to put resources into creating incentives for more people to go into those professions, and we have not done an adequate job of creating incentives for those professionals wherever they are to come to remote areas of our country, rural areas of our country, which have some of the highest need for that kind of treatment. Right. And we've also failed in terms of reimbursement rates. I know some great work has happened here in New Hampshire, but we have failed to give good reimbursement rates. And so also, there's just, it sometimes doesn't make financial sense for the profession to be in those areas where there otherwise are not large populations. And that's a failing of our system, because those are also the hot spots in terms of the need and the demand for the kind of services that should be provided. So it's very much a priority for me, and I think we can actually do something about it. And also going back to when we talk about Medicare for All, we would have to tweak into that system how we would think about where we're creating incentives for mental health professionals to live and work. And then my final point would be, because I can go on and on, also telemedicine. You know, we should always realize that with, you know, there are bad aspects of technology and good aspects of technology. The bad aspects is that, you know, it's stealing our privacy, and we got to deal with that. But the benefit of technology, an example of a benefit, is telemedicine, which mental health professionals and medical professionals are agreeing is a way to get services to remote areas or to rural areas that otherwise don't have service providers in those places. So.
Okay, and right back here.
I'm currently a junior in college, but I am also one of 10.2 million undocumented immigrants who are not protected by DACA. Yeah. my question for you is, I know, like, you know, a lot of politicians speak about like dreamers and how you're going to protect them and how you're going to like, how they bring so much to this country, but I'm more worried about my parents and unaccompanied minors and like people who are fleeing violent war zones and like nobody talks about them. And I want to know like what you're going to do to protect them and to protect other students like me, but more importantly, like those who have been here for years, who nobody really like ever listens to.
Yeah. Well, we're listening to you. And thank you. And thank you for having the courage to stand up. So you're absolutely right. First of all, the issue of immigration is not a monolith, to the point of your question. There are a lot of very specific subsets under that heading that have to be addressed and understood, including those young people like yourself who did not receive DACA protection and are here obviously living a productive life, contributing and identifying in a way that is about wanting to stay and wanting to be protected. And I'll say this, first of all, we've got to pass comprehensive immigration reform. And we are not, but here's the thing, it's not only about a goal, there's no path right now for undocumented immigrants towards citizenship. There's no path. So we have 11, 12 million people, there's an argument about which, go with 11. 11 million people for which there's no real path. So it is irresponsible to not come up with a plan. And there have been bipartisan agreements, but this administration is not going to sign any of them. Because we have a president of the United States who has created a fiction about a crisis at the border, and he has held up the United States government and its workers around his vanity project called a wall. And it's a distraction from the real issues. And it's a distraction from the real issues. So the plan has to be, I say to you, young leader, that we have to get our act together. We have to pass comprehensive immigration reform. The point you made about parents of DACA students and young people is really critically important. I was in those rooms, and it was a fight to say, look, you know, this is not only about who you've decided is kind of the poster child for, you know, adoration. These children have parents who love them. And we should not have a policy that says, oh, so we're gonna take care of those kids, but not the parents that are raising them? That's just wrong. And so the point also is that the policy has to understand that they have parents who work hard, who love them, and there should also be a plan for their parents, because otherwise we're talking about a policy that will, again, separate children from their parents. Can you imagine any one of us with our college-age kid, and the policy is the kid can stay here and you've got to go away? That's not right. So you're absolutely right to raise this subject. And when we think about comprehensive immigration reform, there must also be a plan for the parents of our young people, and understanding that it would not be civil, and it would be wrong, and it would not be something any one of us would want, which is a policy that says the kid can stay and the parents have to leave. So thank you.
We have a question right here.
Hi, my name is Brenda Bouchard. I live here in Portsmouth. My husband, Ken, passed away in November of 2017 after 12 and a half years of living with younger onset Alzheimer's disease. While my mother was living with us at the time, she was diagnosed 7 years ago with Alzheimer's. She's 92. My sister was diagnosed with Alzheimer's last summer. So as you know, 5.7 million Americans live with Alzheimer's today. At a cost of $277 billion. It's anticipated by 2050 that we'll have 14 million Americans at a cost of $1.1 trillion. We're on track to bankrupt Medicare and Medicaid. And as a caregiver for more than 14 years, I understand firsthand the mental, emotional, physical, and financial toll the disease takes. And lastly, I'd like to say that when my sister is prescribed medication therapy, it will be the same one my husband was given in 2010.
Right.
The same medication that came to market in 1996, 23 years ago. So what will you do to try to halt this public health crisis and end this devastating disease? And thank you for taking my question.
Thank you. Thank you. And you're amazing. And thank you. That's a lot. That's a lot. And it is about the patient and the family, to the point of your story, because there is a whole community around this issue. There's no question that we have not done enough in terms of also supporting what needs to happen around research, NIH funding. This administration, for example, has made it one of the lowest priorities, and we have to have a public health system in this country that values public research for public health issues, as opposed to research motivated by who's paying. So it is a matter of research. Again, the incentives in terms of the medication, and I've had extensive conversations with folks about this. I'd be interested in your thoughts. Maybe we can follow up. But also about the incentives or lack of incentive for research around medication as it relates to Alzheimer patients. And really, frankly, part of the issue is that we are not doing enough from a public health perspective in creating good government incentives around an aging population, just as a general matter. And so to your point, we're stuck in decades-old research and approaches and protocols instead of upgrading it. So it is very much on my radar. NIH is a big part of what I think we need to do. And then as a general matter, what we need to do more of in terms of public health policy as it relates to seniors, and understanding that their lives are extended, but with health needs that are not being met because the model is based on a different range of life, frankly. And I'll actually add to that point on the opioid crisis. What we're not talking about now I'm going to jump into that subject, we're not talking about the number of seniors who are medicated and prescribed opioids to deal with the pain of aging and the addiction that is coming from that, that's not being diagnosed and treated. And then when we couple that with also the fact that we have so many seniors who are raising and caregiving for their children's children or grandchildren because the parent of that child is addicted, and what we're doing or not doing to support those grandparents who are dealing with their own health needs and also raising a generation that in previous times they would not have had to raise. And so there's a lot of work that we need to do as it relates to public health and seniors. And I appreciate you sharing your story.
Hey, can we go towards the back? Where's the mic? Yes, thank you.
I think it's a good sign you're here on President's Day.
I hadn't thought of that. I forgot about that. That's right.
So I don't have a question, I have a comment. You were terrific on CNN, that's why we're here. First time we got to see you. You share all our values in this room, obviously, but how do you help Americans get back to the values? Because I think a lot of people are lost. You see polls that are 80% for some kind of gun control, and we still have guns. In fact, what's curious to me is the Senate, elected by the people, can turn their back on an 80% poll to put some kind of controls in.
Yeah.
So how do you help Americans?
Yeah.
I like your saying, by the way, for the people. That's how it was constructed. But how do you help Americans touch back to their values?
Thank you, and thank you for everything you said. So part of it is I strongly believe reminding us that we have more in common than what separates us, and operating from that perspective. Operating from the perspective, use the example of gun violence. Operating from the perspective of that mother or father that lost their child, or, and this is an all too common experience wherever that parent may be, literally thinking about and looking up bulletproof backpacks. Oh yeah. That parent having to answer questions when the kid comes home about the drill they had at class, which taught them to run into a closet and be quiet and turn down their cell phone if there's a shooter in the classroom. The commonality between the parent who lost their child in that mass shooting and the mother or father who is living in a city where gun violence is the leading cause of black and brown men in that community, and understanding the commonality of their experience of loss of their child, and bringing communities together, understanding we have so much more in common than what separates us. I don't think that we have lost our values. I think we need a resurgence of, and a reminder of the fact that we all, at our kitchen table, in the middle of the night, when we are looking at our children or our grandchildren, we have the same values. But I think it's a matter of also agreeing and declaring that we're operating from the same place and not buying into the idea that it's us versus them and that we have nothing in common. And then we have to act on our values. You know, to your point about gun violence, and you mentioned the CNN town hall, so you may have seen it and heard me say it there, but I'll say it again here. The failure to act on gun violence in America is, it is unnecessary. We can act, right? We can act. But let's be clear about what the issue is. The issue is not that we're waiting for another tragedy, like the tragedy, to get everybody to do the right thing. Sandy Hook, 20 6- and 7-year-old babies were slaughtered. We're not waiting for the next tragedy. I was just in South Carolina. I visited Mother Emanuel Church, where they were praying, they were at Bible study, and a gunman comes in and slaughters them. We're not waiting for another tragedy, so that's not it. Well, some people might say, well, we're just waiting for the good idea. We're not waiting for the good idea. We've had all the good ideas. Universal background check. Look, okay, you know what universal background check is? Is this, in its essence. So, you want to buy a gun? Well, we might want to know if you've been found by a court to be a danger to yourself or other people before we let you. Universal background checks. We might want to know if you've been convicted of a violent felony before we let you buy a gun. It's just rational. We're not waiting for a good idea. Oh, there you are. You know, we're not waiting for the good idea. Assault weapons ban. There is no reason to have weapons of war walking the streets of America. An assault weapons ban. So the question becomes, well, what are we waiting for then? What we're waiting for is members of the United States Congress to have the courage to do the right thing. That's what we're waiting for. And elections matter. But, you know, again, and I just want to stress that, you know, in all good fights, guys, all good fights are born out of optimism. So let's remember, we once did have an assault weapons ban. It was not permanent, obviously, and so it needs to be renewed. But we've been there, is my point. So this is achievable, but we are going to have to fight, and we cannot give up.
All right, this is the last question.
Thank you. Thanks. Speaking of truth-telling and holidays, we have a bill here in New Hampshire, HB 221, to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. Yes. To anyone who might not feel like that's more than just a superficial issue, what that meant to me as somebody who was born and raised and went to school here in New Hampshire is that Columbus got a lot of focus and he never stepped foot on mainland North America, genocidal history aside. And we didn't get a chance to elevate voices of Indigenous people here in New Hampshire who are still here in New Hampshire, but are being erased and marginalized every day. So I'm wondering, would you support efforts on a federal level to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, and why does that matter so much?
Sure, yeah. And why it matters is, to your very point, we have to remember history. And this question, I think, really is connected to the last question about our morals and our compass and our goals and our aspirations. We have to remember our history. Uncomfortable, to your point about truths, though it may make us. So last week, so we wrote a bill in my office. Okay. 200 years couldn't get past the United States Senate. We wrote a bill to make lynching a federal crime. It finally got passed. In the Senate, it's still going over to the House. But here's the thing. Why, you ask? Why, you ask? In the year of our Lord 2019 only, is this happening? And part of it is because people did not want to deal and accept, and most importantly, admit that we are the scene of a crime when it comes to what we did with slavery and Jim Crow and institutionalized racism in this country. And we have to be honest about that. We have to be honest. We have to be honest. Because if we're not honest, we are, one, not going to deal with the vestiges of all of that harm. And we're not going to correct course. And we're not going to be true to our values and our morals. And so, similarly, when it comes to Indigenous Americans, the Indigenous people, there is a lot of work that we still have to do. And I appreciate and applaud your point and your effort, and count me in on support.